Welcome to Breakfast at Toad's number 1. So this is my first one of these videos. So it's nothing new. I'm just gonna make videos slightly shorter than I generally do. And what I want to talk about are the last 2 days of my life. So yesterday I finished my 24-hour vlog, and that was an event. People watched it. I think there was only I don't have the exact statistics, but during the time when I was awake and checking the vlog, I think there was only one time for 15 minutes when no one was watching, so pretty much always someone was watching. And I would consider that a success. And well, this is what comes after it. So I finished the 24-hour vlog, and then I started trying to install Windows as a dual boot on my PC. I've been using Linux for a while, and it has done everything just about sufficiently. But the problem with Linux is that it can't really play some games. Now, with most games it does just about fine. Windows does better, sometimes markedly better, but usually it's about equivalent. But it was getting way too hard, first of all, for the GPU to not overheat, and secondly, I started playing Final Fantasy 14, which I could only get to run at low settings at 30 FPS. Now, that would be fine, except I have an $800 computer, depending on what you want to judge the graphics card's price as. Because when it comes to the power supply and the case and the memory, that's $100 or something like that. When it comes to the RAM and the CPU and the motherboard, that's $400, right? So that's $500. When I bought the GPU, it was $200, $300. Nowadays, it would probably be $800. But yeah, it's really only it's true worth. If we were to say that, would be $100. So I'm just gonna say I have an $800 PC. And having a PC this powerful, not able to run a really simple game at adequate frame rates, even with the lowest basically settings, isn't acceptable to me. So I decided that I'm going to finally dual boot Windows and Linux. So now the first step I had to do was basically wipe my computer and install Windows. Not because that was necessary, but rather because there were no resources I could find on how to install Windows as a dual boot on top of Linux. So it's probably possible, but I wouldn't know how to do it. Then that took a long time. What eventually I ended up discovering is that I could torrent Windows 10, I could make that bootable, because the official ISO was impossible to use on a Linux machine, because the Linux tools to make bootable USBs only go up to 4 gigabytes, and the official Windows ISO is 5.4 gigabytes or something like that. So I had to torrent Windows 10 and then make that into a bootable USB. And then this took 5 hours to get to this point. I'll tell most of the time I was just waiting for USBs to be written and files to download and so on and so on. But this took 5 hours. And then I was ready to install Windows 10. This was surprisingly easy, but the hard part was dual booting. Now, this would have also been easy, except I had to figure out the entire process basically from scratch. So what the process ended up being was partitioning the drive in Windows, then managing the second partition in the Manjaro install, creating a second boot file, and then just having a root partition, because I don't have enough space for a swap, which I probably don't need anyway because I have 16 gigabytes of RAM, and home partitions I couldn't do those. but I could make sufficient. I can make a sufficient amount of partitions, and then fucking another 5 hours later, I had the fucking dual boot basically done. I mean, that's an exaggeration. This part took probably less time than that, but I'm not really sure how long it took. Anyway, after that, I started running into problems where the computer would just boot into Linux and it wouldn't give me an option to boot into Windows. What I figured out after like another hour is that I had fucked up the boot partition for Windows in my partitioning process, and that I had to reinstall Windows and do this process over again. That was really easy because I had already done all the steps before, so I just did that process again, and I had a functioning dual boot. Or so I thought. Before I went to bed, I found out that the Windows kept crashing. Every 5 to 10 minutes, Windows would just fucking stop working. It would either blue screen, just crash, or something in between those two. So I went to bed, couldn't figure it out. The day had been long, I was fucking tired. I had spent basically the whole day fucking with these fucking operating systems. And what I ended up doing was, in my fucking sleep/awakening phase, I just was like, okay, what the fuck am I gonna do, right? So I looked on like some forums, and what seemed to be an option was updating Windows, right? So I tried to update Windows, didn't work. The computer crashed, and then it automatically updated Windows. Fucking perfect. Okay, so Windows updated, stopped crashing. I could install Final Fantasy 14, and then I played a few hours of Final Fantasy 14, maybe just like an hour or two. I don't actually know how long I played, but I played some Final Fantasy 14, had a gay old time, and then I was like, let's be gaming, and then my second monitor died. So my second monitor's cable has been failing for like a year. It's always been finicky, and I knew it would die at some point soon. But what really fucked my whole swag up was it wasn't failing on a hardware level, but rather it was failing on a software level. So if I booted into Linux, for example, I could still use two monitors. If I disconnected my first monitor, the second monitor would function. So I did some swapping around, fucking with cables, and eventually I got both of the monitors to work again. Except that lasted for like 5 minutes, and then the second monitor stopped working again. Fuck. At that point, I was fucking dejected as fuck, right? And then I figured out, look, I actually don't need two monitors for Windows, because I'm just going to use Windows to play games. So I was like, okay, I'm just going to play Final Fantasy 14 for a bit more. And then I was like, okay, I'm done. The next quest in the quest line isn't something that I'm really up for right now. And I might as well just stop fucking gaming for the day, right? Just go on with my civilian life, you know, and move on. But first, before I did anything, I went and checked the fucking Linux boot, and in the interim between when it stopped working on Windows and when it was still working on Linux, and the time where it started working on Windows again for like 5 minutes, it had now stopped working on Linux. Now, I don't actually know how severe this is. It's a possibility that this could be fixed. However, a new DisplayPort cable should be really fucking cheap, and I shouldn't have to worry about it. And if the new cable doesn't work, then that's when I should be worried. But I know that the cable is faulty, and I know that the monitor works, I know that the PC works, because I have confirmed that basically. So I can just buy a new cable that's fucking cheap as fuck, and then probably everything should work. So I'm gonna have to do that tomorrow. It's like, this is bearable, right? And that's basically where I stand right now. The state of my PC is basically bearable. So what's next tomorrow? Well, the GPU overheating problem isn't solved solely by switching over to Windows. Now, this solved it in a large part, right? Mostly, my GPU overheating is now manageable at worst, and I could probably use something like Whatman to make it even more manageable. But I don't really care about managing it, but rather I really wish I could solve it, because GPUs are basically impossible to get nowadays, and I would like mine to work. I did consider buying a new GPU, and then I was like, are there really none available? Then I looked it up, and there's basically none of them available. Lighting up another fucking ciggy, like here, yeah. So yeah, anyway, I decided that what I'm gonna try, because this is likely to fix the problems I'm having, is change the thermal paste in my GPU. Now, this has its own downsides, of course. Like, this could go wrong until I'd be out of a GPU, and then I'd just be fucked, and then I couldn't play anything anymore, which is daunting, of course, but I'm gonna be careful, and I just want my PC to work, basically. Although there aren't that many points of failure in switching the thermal paste in a GPU, so I should be around about fine. Anyway, so tomorrow, which is I'm gonna go back to my job as a professional writer, I have decided, because it was really good for my mental health, it was really positive for me in general, and I just have lacked the motivation mostly, but I think most of my motivation has come back at this point. Because the main problem was I was thinking of reading books as something I do to write. However, I also want to know what happens in books, because they give me really powerful thoughts, I guess, and I learn the best from books. So I've adjusted my attitude when it comes to that, and I know that writing is something that will just happen when it happens with me. So basically what all of this means is that tomorrow I'm gonna be fucking busy. I'm gonna have to fucking buy a cable, buy some thermal paste, find some isopropyl alcohol, and all of these might be found in the same store, hopefully. If not, I can just go around stores and see if I can find all of these parts. But yeah, so it should be possible to get all of these things, and that should be fine. But then on top of that, I also want to go back to work. So that's the plan for tomorrow, and that's what I've been doing for the past 2 fucking days. I hate computers, they make my brain hurt, and now I'm just out here smoking because I don't have anything better to do. I also need to fucking try to get in contact with any endocrinologist, because I'm vaccinated. It should be possible to travel and so on and so on and so on if need be. So that's gonna be the next thing I'm gonna do. But that's also a massive amount of effort, because for me there are very few things that are more difficult than like phone calls and emails, because I'm autistic and those things are just hard for me. Also, I think I want to also talk about is the approach we have to mental health, because I'm still listening to the No Thank You Plunder episode of Crabstack, and they talk about like various problems with how we approach mental health, and here's another one. We as a society, we treat mental illness as something with like an initial point of showing symptoms or whatever the fuck, right? We act as if mental health or like what we call mental illness has an onset, and how managing it or treating it is a matter of getting a person back to before the onset of the fucking mental illness. But there are problems with this, as in, for example, for me, I've never been able to detect the onset of my mental quote-unquote illnesses, right? They just basically started when I started being able to think, and they've been there ever since. Like, I haven't been not mentally ill ever since I was like 12. So that's the thing I wanted to point out. I fixed my fucking computer. So I dismantled my GPU, just fucking did it. It was stressful as fuck. One of the most stressful things I've ever fucking done. But I got to the part where it had the fucking chip and the thermal paste. And the thermal paste that was previously installed was just like fucking like this fucking cooked chunk. I'm not even exaggerating, it was fucking atrocious. So I cleaned that off the best I could, which wasn't completely because it was so fucking atrocious I couldn't even completely clean it. And I replaced it with new thermal paste, probably a bit too much, but like, it should be fine. And now the computer just fucking works, because it doesn't have a fucking chunk of like some fucking mystery paste. It was just solid. The thermal paste before had just basically become solid. It's impossible to fucking describe. Like, you kind of have to like see it to believe it type shit. Anyway, so that's been replaced, and the computer doesn't seem to be overheating. I mean, I haven't like really tried it that much, but I tried it for a bit, and it seems to be basically fine. So yeah, my computer should now work, and I got a new DisplayPort cable. It's a bit too short, and that's a like it's just enough. I got like when I went to the store, they were like, yeah, we have like a meter long cables. Yesterday I was like, I should get like 1.5 meters of cable, but then I was like, 1 meter should probably do. So I got myself a 1 meter DisplayPort cable, and it's just enough, like as I predicted it would be. So yeah, my computer is now fixed. Finally fixed. Mixtape by Smite. And now I'm gonna go to work for today, because I decided I'm gonna go to work today. And I'm gonna go read something Journey at the end of the night, probably. I just gotta fucking do it. It's one of those things that's hard to start but easy once I have started. I just have to get over the inertia. I'm so happy my computer is fixed. I'm so fucking happy. Oh, also, in RPGs, I don't get how people ever play classes that aren't DPS mages. Like, every RPG I play, every single one, I just go like, oh, what's the mage that can do most DPS, and then I play that. Like, I have to intentionally meme myself out of playing that if it's just not gonna be fun, because I just go like, oh, wizard cool and damage cool. I wanna do a wizard who does a lot of damage, and then I just do that every single fucking time. Anyway, that concludes my computer fixing. I'm a gamer now. Young Tootsmites Gaming. Time to be a writer. This is gonna be a memorandum to my professional writer arc. So, if you watched the 24-hour vlog, you already know what happened. If you didn't, this is gonna be a quick recap. So, basically, for about a month, I was successfully reading and writing every single day. Now, this isn't really that impressive to most people, but when it comes to me, I just barely have enough energy and motivation to get out of bed, and most days I end up going back to bed eventually. But what ended up happening is I successfully had a schedule, and I felt so much better about myself. I felt like I was a better artist than I used to be. I felt like I was happy with myself and who I was. And on top of all of that, I was doing all of these things I really enjoyed consistently. Because the thing with reading and writing is I always enjoy them. I've never not enjoyed them on like a mental level or an intellectual level. But when it comes to my physical body, just concentrating on something that hard is incredibly straining for me. And I often just get a headache or I just get tired out. But for an entire month, I didn't get those headaches, I didn't get tired out like that. And even when I wasn't feeling that well, I was still able to write and read consistently every single day. 4 hours. That might not sound like too much, but like if you think about it, it means like I was reading probably like 200 pages every single day. I was writing like something like 2,000 words every single day, right? And not every single day, I took breaks and so on, of course, but like on most days, I was reading 200 pages, I was writing 2,000 words. Again, this might not be impressive if you're someone who can be productive really easily, but for someone like me, for whom again getting out of bed is in itself difficult, not because I'm necessarily depressed, insofar as I don't qualify under the common definitions of depression, except when it's winter. Like I know what being really depressed is like. I've been really depressed for most of my life. I'm really depressed every single winter, you know. But right now I'm not really depressed, but it's still hard to get out of bed because just physically I don't have the motivation, the energy, the drive, whatever. But for a month I did, and it was fucking great. And then I was like, okay, I'm not really feeling up to this anymore. I'm gonna take a break. I'm gonna take a vacation. I was intending to maybe take a vacation of like 2 weeks, and that became basically a vacation of like a month. And right now, I was like, okay, yesterday, as you saw at the end of the last clip, I was like, okay, I'm gonna go back to work. I'm excited because I really was excited. But it didn't work out. I got a headache in 30 minutes, and I was unable to continue. And this is even though most of my stressors have disappeared. Most of the things that were making it really hard to function have now stopped affecting me, and I should be able to do these things on a environment level. Now, I did realize after going through all the bullshit with my computer, which was also making me miserable, I did realize that I actually enjoy playing Final Fantasy XIV. So as long as I enjoy this game, I don't really have any massive drive to make art consistently, because I know I've never been able to do that well. But when it comes to the things I admire, when it comes to the things I really appreciate, it's always really consistent, long form works of art. And it's really painful for me that, first of all, I'm not able to be consistent in this way. And secondly, that I have to try to fill my time so desperately, because otherwise I'm just left with most of my life being spent just languishing, right? But I can't do something every day. I can't do something consistently, and it's in the future. It's gonna have to be a matter of rebuilding myself into a person who can be more consistent. Because I enjoy reading, I just have to figure out how to understand that I enjoy reading. When I brought this up to No Thank You one day, because again I talked to No Thank You a shit ton, he was like, "Yeah, it's like it's about habits and accessibility, right?" And he was like, "Yeah, like if I kept my bass guitar on the other side of the room, I'd never play bass guitar, but I keep my bass guitar next to my bed, so I very often do." And I was like, my problem is I keep my brain on the other side of the room, and that really is my problem. So I have to figure out how to bring my brain into my head so it's not on the other side of the room. But yeah, is how it is and goes how it goes. I'm just kind of upset that I have to live within my constraints, because I'm fine being stupid, right? I'm fine not being very intelligent. I mean, I would say I'm relatively intelligent, but even if I wasn't, I would be fine with that. And I know this because I've had periods of time where I've been on substances like alcohol that have kind of like started rotting away my faculties, right? And when that was happening, I wasn't feeling all too upset about it. So I would be fine being stupid. I would be fine being most things. What I'm not fine being is inconsistent, because consistency is such an important part when it comes to like what makes me feel decent, and just lacking that is really really uncomfortable for me. So that's a memorandum on being a professional writer. I'm just gonna play FF14, have fun with that. My computer runs well enough now. I didn't solve the overheating problem with the thermal paste, but my computer has been running less hot and it has been cooling down faster. That's the main thing I noticed, that the computer has been cooling down way faster than it was cooling down before I replaced the thermal paste. So I'm gonna take that as a good sign, and it is like this, and the first chance I get, I'm going to replace my graphics card, upgrade that. And yeah, I mean, I can enjoy life even when I don't have enjoyable things to do. And this would be, I mean, I have enjoyable things to do, but not on like an intellectual level, I guess. And this wouldn't be a problem as I've been figuring out if I was in a relationship, because that would just be a default thing to do, Like I've been talking about this a lot lately, where I think people need a default thing to do. For a long time for me, that was RuneScape. Now, in RuneScape, I've basically done every single grind that I enjoy. And now it's just a matter of finishing everything up. And that's not really what I'm into. So I'm taking a break from RuneScape. So I guess now my default thing to do is Final Fantasy XIV, but that's not really anywhere as good as RuneScape was at being a default thing. But the thing with being a relationship is that you always have a thing you can default back to, which is like, oh, hey, person who I'm in a relationship with, wanna hang out, wanna come do stuff, and then that just happens, And also it fixes a shit ton of other problems that are just tied to physical loneliness and so on and so on and so on and so on and so on. Like, people be out here being like, oh, a relationship won't solve all of your problems, and that's true, but it will solve a lot of them. At least for me. So this is the segment that's gonna be a regular segment in the Breakfast at Toad's fucking videos, which is the response to no thank yous latest video segment. So, first of all, I haven't finished the video yet, but I have to really make a quick point because I will fucking explode if I don't. No thank you. You're an intelligent person. How the fuck can you be like, oh yeah, the chimera and the chess scene is there to just make you cry? Okay, let me explain what's happening in the chimera and chess scene, right? So you have this fucking character, right, the blind girl, who's been mistreated by her society for her entire life, right? And now she finds herself being thrust into this situation where the entire fate of, like, humanity or whatever the fuck lies in her hands, in showing compassion to someone when she had never herself experienced compassion. Let me think, could this perhaps be a metaphor? Could this perhaps signify something that it doesn't literally embody or encompass? Maybe this is a statement about empathy. Maybe this is a statement about how people in society can actually make their lives better even when they have been mistreated, because mistreating people after being yourself mistreated doesn't lead to good consequences. Maybe this is a convoluted allegory that builds up on fucking like volumes of context that leads up to this point, right? Because you have this constantly evolving, constantly adapting horror, right? The fucking chimera, and right, and this creature is consistently becoming more and more powerful to a point where no human could ever match it. But the thing is, it doesn't know about humanity. It doesn't know how humans work. It only knows about the power it itself has, right? And through this fucking person who has not had a great life, showing this creature like some empathy, that creature then in turn becomes human, which ultimately ends up leading to the resolution of the arc, right? there's no symbolism there. There's nothing of value there. There's nothing you can read into it. You have to do a stretch to actually read something into it. Now, of course, you might say that this is not what specifically you are into, and that's completely fair. This is not a point that appeals to everyone in the fucking world. But it is very blatantly something that has deeper value than what it just signifies. So this is my fucking first rant. So the second point I wanted to make is that there cannot be a clear delineation between value and enjoyment. Because when it comes to something like kaiji, the spectacle is essential to the value the show provides, right? The show makes powerful statements about greed, about humans as a species, right, about like how emotions can be experienced and so on and so on and so on, but it relies fundamentally on this grand spectacle that's never going to be replicated in the real world, or presumably it isn't going to be, and it relies on these absurd turns that don't really belie anything that a human might experience. However, since it manages to create a fictional human experience that goes beyond what any real human experience does, it creates a really powerful portrait into various emotions and various feelings, and it reveals some truths and so on and so on and so on. And this also applies to other things, although kaiji is the most obvious one I could think of. But like in a shonen, for example, it's all about like, oh, why is there this giant fight? It's about, oh, what did the characters do that led up to this giant fight? What are the characters feeling? What's the dynamic between the heroes and the villains, and so on and so on and so on? And those questions are the ones that actually have value in them. Almost like analyzing things makes them better. Okay, so this is the final response part. Is I personally have a very hard time finding value in my own art, because watching this video made me realize that I can very easily be like, oh yeah, I'm making something enjoyable, right? I can look at something even when it's technically bad, or when it's not really something I have my heart and soul in, and I can go like, oh yeah, this is something that's enjoyable. But I can't look at anything I've ever made and be like, oh yeah, it's valuable that this thing exists, you know. And I always think that there's some other, right? I always assume that there's something beyond the things I'm capable of, which itself would have value. Because I look at, like, for example, a person I know submitted this article to DCRS. It's called A Train of Fools. I would suggest you go to dcrs.xyz, click on the 5G publishing house link, then click on Post Anthropology, and then read Train of Fools. It's also in the archive, so you can go to dcrs.xyz, look at the bottom right of the page. You can see a thing that says archive, and you can click on that, and you can Ctrl F for Train of Fools, right? Anyway, it's a great article, and or short story rather, and it made me feel emotions I didn't even know of, you know. Like this is how people often describe things that they think are really good, right? Something that makes you feel emotions you've never even like thought of. And to me, this is the essence of value, right? Like this is why John Boyce's like 1776 or whatever the fuck it's called, I don't know, 17,776, 17776, whatever the fuck, right? But why that is one of the greatest pieces of fiction in my opinion, because it manages to push something that's fundamentally a gimmick, right, into depths of like conceptual mastery, and then figure out like fucking, oh, here are things that humans could possibly experience but can't experience, you know. And it goes beyond reality, it goes beyond descriptiveness, and it functions in a realm of its own, where you're just left on the sidelines, like fucking asking questions about it, and so on and so on and so on. Like, to me, that's what value is about. And when I'm putting something into text, that emotion obviously can't appear, right? Because what I talk about are things that I think about, like I can't innovate to myself. So there's always this feeling like that there's something beyond me, there's something that's better than me that I have to get to so I could start innovating to myself. But like that never happens. Well, what realistically probably happened is that John Boyce has spent his life thinking about death and thinking about football and so on and so on, and so he managed to create this conceptual masterpiece, right? It didn't need justification at that point. It just needed a bit of direction. And I'm just young, ultimately, and I need way more fucking practice. I think I'm doing a good job with the things I'm doing right now. Like, it's not perfect, but I think the gimmicks themselves are interesting enough to really consider them. I just need to find better ways to express them. Fuck, I wanna be a writer. I wanna have the energy, I wanna have the motivation. I just fucking don't, and it makes me fucking miserable. Actually, I have to add an addendum to what I was saying, because I turned the video off, like the recording off, and I went to watch the new Asmongold video where he goes like, oh yeah, I will try Final Fantasy 14, right? And I was thinking like, oh, this is gonna be so fucking great. This is gonna be like a masterpiece, even though it's just a guy playing Final Fantasy 14, right? And then it just clicked to me, like what I was just talking about, what I'm just seeing, right? It's not about what you're doing, it's also about who's doing it, right? It's not about like, oh, someone wrote 17776, right? It's that John Boyce wrote that, because John Boyce himself has like fucking is one of the most influential YouTubers. Is kind of a legendary sports writer, I've heard, although I wouldn't really know. And he himself holds this type of prestige, right? Because you know that anything that John Boyce writes is inherently going to be good. And with Asmongold, right? You know that Asmongold is gonna like fucking have an opinion, right? He's gonna have a take. He has spent fucking 20 years playing World of Warcraft or something like that, right? And he is a veteran, right? He knows MMOs, so on and so on and so on. So even if he says something that isn't really interesting about Final Fantasy 14, fuck, we still know that I just drank some Dr. Pepper, so the fucking gas is shaking up in my stomach. Anyway, even when he says something that someone else could say, it comes from a place where it's something that Asmongold can be trusted on, to an extent. And I think that's all of what I'm missing. I think that I'm really after is a feeling of seniority, and I have that in a regard, right? I have it in some regards, because I'm the only person who I know who has written a book, right? So it's like, oh, I have some type of seniority in like writing books and so on, and so on. But it's not like, oh, that's a new Toadsmite book, that's gonna be interesting, right? Even though people generally know that I'm a good writer, right? I want to get to a point of prestige where I can have the confidence that something I do as a change of pace is going to be inherently interesting, I guess. Anyway, just wanted to add that thought. I don't know what it means. It doesn't really have to mean something.